You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to the 41st episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Sims. Today, Chris Webster and I talk with Michael Ashley of Codifi about digital archaeology. Codifi is a proud sponsor of the Archaeology Podcast Network, so check out their services and products at codifi.com.
All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast. We've got, I feel like a Saturday Night Live producer or something like that. We've got probably five-time guest, or whatever the hell the number is, Michael Ashley on today. Michael, how's it going?
It's going great.
I feel like you're a co-host at this point, but, we'll just, we'll have our own podcast soon enough with Codifi. But until then, we have a lot to talk about, and we decided to devote yet another Archaeotech podcast to Codifi and what Codifi has coming out, because a lot is changing. You know, things are changing on a really fast trajectory for Codifi, which is great. We've got, and not changing really, but adding to. Let's just put it that way. So we've always got new stuff to say, which I love because I'm part of Codifi. And Chris Sims, Chris, how's it going?
Hey, going good. I've got a little bit of a head cold. I'm going to try and keep all my coughing and sniffling out of the audio tracks.
Nice, much appreciated. Chris is also part of Codifi now. That's a new announcement. So, he's helping us build this thing out. Chris has a lot of knowledge of the East Coast on shovel test pits and all that stuff, and we're developing modules for that. So, and I've done probably 10,000 shovel tests in the East Coast or more. Actually, probably quite a bit more than that when you start to really think about it. But that was all a really long time ago. And Chris has way more recent experience than I do on that. So it's great to have him on board to talk about stuff like that. Plus, when I was doing it, I was a field tech. I wasn't part of the leadership and designing things and stuff like that at that stage of my career yet. And Chris was doing stuff like that when he left the East Coast. So anyway, we'll have more on that later as we get it finalized and hopefully on the Codifi podcast. So anyway, Michael, we're going to talk about Codifi now and everything Codifi has coming up. But first, let's just talk about what Codifi has done in the last month and a half as far as public outreach goes, and maybe do a little your thoughts and impressions from the experiences at the Great Basin Anthropological Conference in Reno at the beginning of October and the Southeastern Archaeology Conference in Athens, Georgia at the end of October.
Yeah, and we should also mention that there was an election between now and the last time we actually went out and reached out to people. And just as a kind of a precursor or foreboding kind of moment to talk, we'll definitely cover that in the later part of this podcast.
Yes, sir.
But the Great Basin was my first opportunity to go to a regional conference. It was amazing to be there and have everyone so kind of focused on one area of the world. Mm-hmm. We did a CRM podcast there, so you all should listen to that. You guys can throw that in the show notes for sure. Mm-hmm. But my big takeaway for both the Great Basin and SEAC was very different kinds of archaeology, but they both have the same symptom, which is that, and I'm definitely I couldn't do it when we did because it was a CRM podcast. I had to be kind of polite. So I get to be a little less polite this time. But basically the symptom that both conferences have is that, well, I guess archaeology has generally, is that, wow, we are so stuck in paper.
Yeah.
Just let the silence just sit there in a really not good way. And again, I'm not anti-paper. I love paper. I love archival. I'm surrounded by photos in my office here, and I love all that. But it's about where and when and how, or as we like to say, kind of putting paper in its place. So what happened at both conferences, which was really, heartwarming, we had this fantastic booth at GBAC because it was local. It was in Reno. I was able to stay at your house, Chris. Mm-hmm. And we brought the truck and the whole thing. It was at this casino. And we had the drone up. We had this beautiful booth. And, folks just came up and said, this is it. This is exactly what we want to do. This is our future. And yet there's this kind of gulf between where we all want to go and where we are. It's this crazy space in between. It's a prohibition moment. So we have to cross this line. We just got to get it done. At SEAC, we'll talk about I was kind of lay the seed so you can use this and we can move forward. But we did this workshop on photogrammetry, and I asked a question. I said, well, how many of you, is about 30 something people in the audience, how many of you, have ever done a project where you record digitally? I mean, like completely digitally in any form of way like that. The answer to that was zero. It's like everyone is still very completely entrenched in paper. And so if there's anything that we could talk about today, it's going to be why that needs to stop and what we're trying, and not in a kind of pejorative way, but why it really is time to kind of move forward on that. So that's, it was encouraging to have so many people, especially just to kind of call them out, kind of the millennial generation, so excited about what we're doing and so encouraging. And it's like, my God, finally, And I mean, it's funny because, you give me a lot of crap calling me like Gandalf the Grey and whatnot. I get that because I am 487 years old, but apparently we're still the future, which is cool. So.
Yeah. And not to bring back the workshop that we did at SEAC, I mean, there were like 25 some odd people in that room, right? And not a single one of them had done a project completely digitally, but every single one of them had used a total station before. So there's a huge disconnect.
Yeah, that was actually quite interesting. I was first encouraged that people were learning how to use a total station, but I was very sad that the other thing that they were not learning at all, which I know we're going to talk about today, is photography. And digital, not for digital, whatever form you want to say. I mean, given that this has to be one of the most important ways that we document archaeological anything, the fact that it's just not a thing right now is that really needs to change. So I'm hoping in this particular podcast we'll talk about all those things.
Yeah, it never really hit me before I really started closely working with you, Michael, and which is stupid because we kind of treat photography. Now, some companies don't do this and some companies do, and it really kind of depends on where you're at and how big your project is and how stressed you are. But some companies put an emphasis on really good photography and some do not. I would say the majority out west is they do not. And that is exemplified by the fact that, there's a person on the crew that always gets stuck taking photographs. And it's just never emphasized as like a huge deal. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, photographs need to be done, blah blah blah. It's like a thing that you have to do to get past the site, and it's a roadblock. And let's just get these photographs done and get out of here. And so as a result, we see photographs taken on the ground of artifacts where the artifact is like, if it's prehistoric, it's blending into the background. You can't even see it because it was taken on gravel or rock of the same type. Or it's been taken on a really crappy, quote unquote photo board, which is really just a piece of cardstock with a scale on it or something like that. And because they don't know how to white balance, or the thing can't even white balance, maybe the camera can't even white balance, they just don't even focus on that, and their photographs turn out blue. So photography is one of the most important things, I think, because we focus a lot on description in archaeology. But if perhaps your description is a little off or something like that, if you have really good photography, somebody 20 years from now can come and rewrite that description and make it right. So, that's the thing to take away, is if you have really good photographs and your data is reproducible, and your descriptions are not reproducible unless you have really good photographs. So I'm glad to be associated with Michael because of that, because I'm not a professional photographer and never had that kind of training. I took some classes in college, but you really need to have a workshop or training in that kind of thing to know exactly what you're doing with just some small little rules. So that's a good segue into one of the products that Codifi is putting out, and we've had a number of sales on already, and we're already producing new things to put in the store. So, Michael, why don't you talk about the photo boards from Codifi?
Yeah, so this is one of those kind of Cinderella stories out of nowhere kind of things, to quote one of the best movies ever. Um, so you know when you do something forever and you just don't even think
Mm-hmm.
that it's a thing. Um, well, it turns out that when we're out doing photography out in the field, we don't carry a backdrop with us.
Right.
I just let this ponder for a second. This is when you just like, oh, wait a minute. Of course we don't. But I do. It's like photographers do. But you just don't. I mean, so what? Oh, you guys don't carry lighting and all this stuff with you when you're out recording stuff. So um, there are basically kind of two things you need to get a good photo of an object in the field, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
One is you need to be able to have some form of homogeneous background. Now, I can say, looking at photos from literally forever, and this goes also to black and white photos, where you can't actually tell what color the background was because they're black and white, but we can if you read the, as you were just saying, Chris, the captions or understand the notes that were taken when they recorded. But for example, recording an object on a green background, like even though it's homogeneous,
Mm-hmm.
will fool the camera into thinking that the image, that the object that you're recording is magenta because it's the opposite of green.
Hmm.
So I can tell you from back in the day where, I was looking at images that people were taking with their cameras, actual film cameras, of their kids playing soccer, or you're out in the park and it's a big green field, you will look pink, right?
Right.
Because the background is green. So the first thing we need is a homogeneous background that isn't just the soil. I love in situ photographs, don't get me wrong, that absolutely should happen. And that is the second thing that we realized we needed to solve, which is we need to provide in the field not a gray card. Those of you who have any form of photographic background will understand that there might be this thing called a gray card, which is a particular color gray that you record in order to balance the color for non-digital cameras. But digital cameras require what's called white balancing. And you do that by having a standard that is a very specific color of gray, 18% to be specific,
Mm-hmm.
that you stick in the scene. But you have to do this work what you have to do is you basically have to do two things. You have to balance the camera itself to that gray by basically zooming in on that gray card and like saying, okay, this is the scene's color is this. And the second thing is in some post-processing step, you're going to go in and use something like Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever to balance by using an eyedropper on that gray card. Okay, I just lost 99.9% of our audience because no one's going to do that second step, and most people aren't going to do the first. So, as we're calling it, the Codifi Magic Field Photo Board, we're calling it that because if you just, as you, Chris, personally have experienced and can attest to,
Mm-hmm.
this board is exactly what we just described. It's a white balanced gray color. It has some special properties on it we'll get into in a minute. But when you put an artifact on it in the field, it changes the color of your camera. So even if you just set your camera on auto white balance, your photos are already going to be so much better.
Mm-hmm.
The second part is that the background has this interesting texture, and all the photos I've seen so far taken with it have this really kind of nice soft shadow. They look really professional just by virtue of them being on this background.
Yeah.
But it actually is recording the environmental color of the scene. So that's the thing that it does. So if you take a photograph and you haven't changed the color and those photos are blue, like because they're balanced for, it turns out, for the ground, which is generally a yellowish color, like 10YR 4/7 or something, and yet it's daylight, so they're really blue. We can't fix that stuff in post. There's no fixing. They're just going to be blue. I mean, you can try to make them less blue, but they're basically screwed. They're not going to work.
Right.
So what we want to be able to do is by using this balancing card in the field, we're able to take care of that issue right away, which is cool.
Yeah.
It also has on the card just this. We've put on it, as you'll see, scales. So you have both in centimeters and inches on the board, so you can at least just measure your objects in the field. It's super lightweight. It's totally waterproof. It's totally durable. It's all those things. So that's the idea behind the card.
Yeah, and I'll say I used this card in some field work last week, actually last weekend on a historic project, and it was, or the photo board, and it was amazing. It's a good size. I was able to stick it right in my backpack. I didn't have to, we don't have a case designed for this thing yet. We're working on that, but so I just, it's made out of high pressure laminate, so the back is like a black color almost, and the front is of course the gray, and even at one point, I dropped it and didn't know I dropped it and left it in the desert for a little while, just in the dirt, and then came back to it and found it. And it's heavy enough that it didn't blow away in the wind, but it's light enough that I don't even notice it. And it's durable. You can't even really bend it. It's made out of high pressure laminate. And I was dropping rusty 1840 to 1880 time frame objects on it, big things made from wagons. There's a lot of wagon parts out where we're working, and I was just dropping these things right on the photo board, and then I'd blow off or brush off whatever comes off of that artifact before I take the photograph, and then take the picture. And now a lot of all the pictures we took were either with an iPhone 7 Plus or an iPad Mini 4. And the app that we use is called ProCam, which I think we've talked about before. If we haven't, we should. And with ProCam, and I suggest doing this rather than just the native application, but with ProCam, you can not only take pictures in TIFF format, which is required for Nevada BLM, but you can also, if your device is up for it, like my iPhone 7 Plus, you can take pictures in RAW as well. And so you can also do different things like lock the white balance and lock different things. So we were able to kind of focus on the photo board first. I'd focus on the artifact, tap the screen where the photo board was, and then it would focus on the photo board, lock the white balance, and then tap on the object, take the photograph, and it's white balanced in the field, not post-processing, but in the field. So that's just phenomenal. It was amazing. And I could tell the difference on photos where I didn't do that first versus photos where I did do that first. Now, if you didn't do that first, the whole point of the background being gray is it's a known color. So you bring it into Lightroom or Photoshop, or I use Aperture for Mac or something like that. And if you've got a little white balance selector and an eyedropper tool, you select the whiteboard and it knows, hey, I'm selecting a white balance color, and it does that same thing for you. It actually is magic. So I love it. Michael?
Well, I mean, so yeah, exactly. And I actually made a video. We're gonna have it out soon. It's actually, like there's the ground, and the ground is whatever the color of the ground is, and you see the object. And we, as human beings, this is a whole like different conversation. We can look at the environment and correct the color in real time because we're humans. Mm-hmm. But cameras can't. They just can't. They don't. That's not how they're designed. So the color will be whatever that scene is. But when you just move the camera over onto the photo board, it is truly kind of magical. Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about what the actual magic is, because it isn't just the board itself. The idea is that we want to level up. I like actually what your wife Rachel, another archaeologist, said. Our objective is to level up photography for everybody. Okay, that's our objective. It isn't to sell more photo boards, although we're really blown away by how many people are buying them. So that's really cool. Mm-hmm. But basically, it is about getting archaeological photography to not suck. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely what we're trying to do. But along with that, what you said at the very beginning of this segment, it's about the captioning. So, and when you look at the board, you'll see that there's some very interesting kind of things going on, which I know we're about out of time, so I'll talk about very quickly. One, on the left-hand side, there are 3 photogrammetric markers on there. So you can actually use the board to record your artifacts in 3D. And it totally works. It's amazing. The second thing is that the bottom section is an area for captions. And that works in 2 ways. I'll explain it very quickly. First, you could just literally have a space where you could have caption. That's fine. But Codify caption is actually going to write that caption for you, which is a whole cool thing. And then the last part is in the bottom right-hand corner is this little square where you can put a physical barcode. And just by photographing your object with that barcode, Codify Caption can read that barcode and do all of the captioning for you all the way through to museum-grade accessioning. And that has been a couple of years in the works. And that is why we're calling this thing magic. Our objective is basically to get us to stop having to think about how to do all this stuff and just get to the doing. So we're kind of thrilled. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And we're going to take a break right now, and we will talk about the different types of boards, because we don't just have a single photo board coming out. We'll talk about the different types of boards we got coming out this month, and also the ones that we're thinking of for the future, and a way for you to suggest new ones that you'd like to see, and vote on those so we can come out with stuff that you actually need when you need it. So we'll be back in just a minute.
Hello, APN listeners. Today we have some exciting news. The Center for Digital Archaeology, PCS, and Codifi have teamed up to create an exciting new online training program built especially for you. Visit digitaltraining.site and you can sign up for free interactive office hour sessions to get help and share ideas about everything from digital photography to drone usage in archaeology, and even tips and tricks on how to prepare for your next job interview. We're offering deep dive, 2-hour webinars and intensive single-day workshops so that you can truly level up your skills. This is cutting-edge training provided by experts in the fields of digital imaging, cultural resource management, business practices, and more. Courses will fill up fast, so visit digitaltraining.site today and see what we have in store for you. That's digitaltraining.site. We look forward to learning with you.
All right, we're back. So we've talked a lot about what our photo board does and what it is, but it's not just a photo board. This particular one that I used this last weekend is our prototype, and we've already made some slight changes to that based on real world experience, and we're sending that off to the printers this week so we can start printing them and shipping them. Well, when I say this week, I mean the week before Thanksgiving. I know you guys are listening to this in after Thanksgiving, but. As you're listening to this now, all this should be available on our store at codifi.com/shop. So what we've got coming out right now is we've got the 10 by 12 photo board, which is our full size. It's got centimeters and inches. But we were thinking of all the other things that we put inside of photos that could probably use that 18% gray background and then different sizes of things as well. So it was kind of a no-brainer to do sort of a 4x6 photo board from, it's kind of like the size of the palm of your hand a little bit. Well, not my hand. I have little sausage fingers. But somebody's normal-sized hand who has, 6 inches from palm to tip of your fingers. My wife makes fun of my hands all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Anyway, so a 4x6 in inches and a 4x6 in centimeters, it did make sense to me as an archaeologist in the field to put both scales on one board, because typically, I'm measuring prehistoric stuff or measuring historic stuff, and these are small enough and light enough that I can carry both, and it's not that big a deal. So another thing we're putting out that should be out by the time you hear this is what I want to call the directional arrow. Not the north arrow that everybody typically calls it when you look on Forestry Supply where people typically get those things. All the north arrows actually have an N on them because they're actually north arrows. But I can think of a number of circumstances where I actually just wanted that thing in the scene, and I wanted it to point another direction that I was going to point out on the caption. So I was going to say in the description for the photo, the arrow is pointing east for some reason or whatever. So we wanted to leave that open and not actually put an N on it. But all these things, where there's normally white with other people, it's actually the 18% gray. So you can take any scene, any photo that you put this thing into, and then white balance the entire thing and solve all your color problems just by having this in the scene somewhere. So that's what we're looking at. Michael, what do you think we're looking at for the future on these things, of photo boards? Because we've got a lot of places we want to go with this.
Well, first of all, I just got to say, we started this thing, as you may have been hearing if you are listening to all the podcasts, called ideas.codifi.com. And in that, we got this great feedback from a gentleman named Carl who came to SEAC, who specifically said that he really wanted a pocket-sized board. I mean, the way he rolls, he's not going to pull out a 10 by 12, although we'll probably get him there eventually. So that's awesome, and that's why we're doing that. And they have a lanyard hole in it, and their pocket size will be great for stuffing all of the stockings. But I have to say, working now with both of you guys, wow, really thinking through. This is our opportunity to really kind of think through a disrupt for how we've always been doing things. I am a photographer. I have certainly used north arrows that don't have an N on it to point out features that completely make sense. Because think about it. If you have a profile, okay, so the profile is what it is. And the fact that it's, and sometimes pointing out where north is has no meaning at all. It's a profile. Okay.
Right.
It starts from the ground and goes up in Z. So the idea, but there might be a core thing I want to point at in that scene, and having an arrow would be great, but we think that arrow should be north. So Chris, what you said is perfect. We need to be able to provide a caption for what that is. And we need to have an arrow and tell us what the arrow is. And that is the idea of this directional arrow. I love it. So in the arrow, it has in the same piece of geometry, half the arrow is in inches. It's got different shapes, so you can have all your inches. And the other half is in centimeters, millimeters, in fact, all the way down. So, and the background isn't white. So basically, guys, if anything you get from us, the background isn't white. It's which is kind of perfect given the Trump era. It's a particular shade of gray that allows you to white balance from that. So long as you have any of our things that we're building in the scene, you can use that to get a color balance of your scene. So I guess I'm saying in response to you is like all the things that we're thinking about right now are about in a digital photography era, how we can not just improve, but frankly, dramatically improve photography. So white balance is a nice start. Actual color checkers will be an evolution from that. And then watch the space, because we're going to be getting down to really, for those that really want to get into this stuff, especially for things like 3D modeling and whatnot, we're going to be getting into all sorts of ideas of how to really calibrate the scene for environments, so you can drop a whole model into a 3D realm and all these other kinds of stuff. So, so watch the space.
All right, so Chris, you've been listening to this whole conversation, and you've been part of our conversation in the background as part of Codifi regarding the photo boards. What is, as a practicing archaeologist, what would you like to see produced in the way of photography equipment, I guess, for lack of a better word, things that you've either, would like to see in the lab or in the field that could use this 18% gray background and really enhance the workflow that you've seen done in the past?
Well, I think it's kind of complicated to answer that question, because I can see a lot of potential for this to change the way the fieldwork and lab work workflow is done in CRM. So traditionally with larger CRM firms, and even with smaller firms, you've got artifact photos are done kind of at the end of the whole process. So, you collect it in the field, you bag it, you tag it, you analyze it in the lab, and you kind of don't really come back around to the artifacts until you're doing the reporting. And so I think the way that this is going to shake up the workflow is going to put artifacts back in the beginning of the whole process. And it's going to kind of keep it more of the focus of the process and the focus of the reporting in a positive way. So when I say shake up, I don't mean that in like a, we're gonna disrupt it in any sort of negative sense. I think it'll be really neat. And there's a lot of stuff that of course needs sensitive handling in a lab, but in the West we don't collect a lot of artifacts, and so I think that the photo boards are going to be especially useful in those kind of situations where you have cultural materials that don't need to be collected. And from a conservation perspective, I think that's a win-win for archaeology, because we don't really need to be collecting all of the things. But if we're able to study all the things and photograph all the things and produce, photos that have research value in the field, then that's awesome, and we're able to take a lot of research value from it without taking the cultural resources themselves. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I think that it's going to be interesting to see how people adjust their existing workflows, if they're using these kinds of products.
Right. Well, Michael, if other people have ideas when they see our shop and they're like, man, I wish they had this, what could they do about that?
Well, I mean, so one of the things that we've done with our B Corp here is we've launched this thing we're calling codify.com/ideas, where you can go in and any idea you have for anything, we hope that we can have a place to capture it. And so again, we're not going to be apologizing for building a company around the thing that we all needed for years, which is some form of kind of Amazon superstore for archaeology, because we totally need that to be a thing for all the digital stuff. And, we can pay homage to Forestry Supply and others who we'll be working with that have done it for physical things, but we need a place where all the gears and stuff we need to have to do stuff will exist. But beyond that, we have the ideas that we all have. And I'm blown away by all the ideas that people keep sharing with me personally. And we want to capture those in a place and have conversations about them. So codify.com/ideas is exactly what that place will be. And it's just a start. We have some ideas already there, which is fantastic. A quick example on photography is someone wrote and said, it'd be a great segue for later when we talk about training, but said, all right, the board is really cool. It's got these scales on it, but what we really need is a scale that kind of can levitate, because what we really need is a scale to be a couple centimeters off of the board so that it's in focus with the plane of, say, I don't know, the top of the lithic or whatever. And that is actually true. And yet it would be even better to have a scale on the board and another one at that ethereal kind of in space place, or to use things like hyperfocal imaging, which is a technique where you can actually take a series of photos and get everything in focus, which is something you just can't do with non-digital photography, at least not easily. That's really exciting and really cool. So I feel like this will be a place where if you have ideas for things like, again, photo boards or other things, or questions about, we're kind of obsessing with photography, but it's not just that. It's whatever you need to do. As Chris Sims, as you were just saying, a lot of folks that came up to us said, oh my God, we're totally going to use this in the field, or they didn't believe that they could use it in the field. I got two quick things to share. These are the two extremes of the situation. I was like, oh my God, this board would be way too cool. I would never take it in the field because it might get broken. It's like, please take it in the field. It's designed from the same material that all the beautiful scenes you see, the signs of the National Park Service that are full color that never fade. And you go,
yeah,
wow, how come this fun? So that's exactly what this is. That's why we're using it. And it's amazing. I mean, it was a Park Service that actually got us turned on to it. That's the first. But the second thing is, so yes, we're building a lab board. It's going to be this huge circle with all the 3D gadgetry on the edges. But the other one is, like, it turns out this material will work underwater. So I know lots of folks that do underwater archaeology. I don't know anyone that's ever taken a photo board underwater to balance color.
That's insane.
Yeah,
we can do that. It's going to work. It's totally going to work. And it's exciting. So this board, if you bought even our version 1 that we're finally releasing, you can take it out and you can use it underwater just fine. Now, granted, if you go way deep, you can't use ambient lighting, but you still have to balance your color. Even if you use like a Nikona's flash or your own, quote, artificial lighting, you still want to balance to a background. And, as much as we love the reefs, it'd still be better to have that reef shot and then still have a photograph of an object, especially if you can't collect it. So stay tuned for that. But we're really excited. We just want to see what people do with this thing. Dare it, try it out.
Nice.
Space archaeology. We'll try that next. We'll see how it works in space.
I think the moon's already 18% gray, but whatever. Every picture on the moon is white balance.
Cheese, but yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I've got some gray cheese in my fridge, I think. Anyway, so just real quick, we're gonna take a break here in a minute, but I just want to mention some of the other things that we're thinking about and input through ideas. Codifi.com/ideas would be great. But we're looking at just a static ruler, because sometimes you can't set something on a board and you just want to point at the ground and take a picture of it, but you still want it to be white balanced. So, a ruler of certain length for that, but also a folding ruler that's similar in, I guess, style to the folding 2-meter rulers that we're all used to for excavations. But this would be, I think, not 2 meters. We're thinking about a meter. And it would be a lot wider, a lot more sturdy, a lot more durable. It won't be wooden, so it won't break. I don't know how many of us have broken one of those things. But anyway, so we're working on a version of that also. And then and maybe not even folding, but telescoping. If we can get that to work and we can figure that out, so that'd be really cool. So you can actually whip out your folding ruler, telescoping, and have a little sword fight. But I suggest not doing that. Anyway. Also a lab board, we need something a little bigger with a little bit different design for labs and for a circular shape with the markers on it for doing, 3D photogrammetry in a lab on a rotating table. And then one thing that we're really excited about is doing, because we heard a lot about this at SEAC, people were, I work out in the West here a lot, so my thinking is always taking photographs of artifacts in the field. But when we showed this nice big photo board to people at SEAC out in the Southeast, their first thought was, where do I write on this? Because I'm setting it up in my excavation. We're like, oh yeah, totally. So we're thinking about maybe just a blank gray board that you actually don't write on, and the software writes the caption for you when you take the photograph. So, but that board is in your scene, so we know where to put that information, and so we can white balance your photo. So you can. And then also, a calibration scale type of thing, similar to the chi scales, which we can link to in the show notes, so you can see those. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break, again, our final break, and we'll come back and talk about some of the other stuff that Codifi is doing, move away from photo boards just a little bit, and then into some exciting things near the end. All right, back in a minute.
The CRM Archaeology podcast brings together a panel of cultural resource management professionals to discuss the issues that really matter to the profession. Find out about networking strategies, job hunting, graduate programs, and much more. We'll often feature interviews with college professors, CRM business owners, and experts as well. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
All right, we're back for our final segment, and we are not going to do an app of the day segment because, well, we are going to do an app of the day, and the app, as we've done before, is Codifi. Now, Codifi is the name of our company, but it's also the name of our software. So, really, Codifi CRM, Codifi Caption, things like that. So, and we're going to have some other things coming out in the future, but right now, we're going to talk about the thing that's coming out first, which will likely be Codifi Caption. So, Michael, why don't you tell us, since we talked about how to take photographs in the field and how to set up your scene, why don't you tell us what Codifi Caption is in that process and how it will help us be, better archaeologists and better archivists and better people all around in this Trump administration.
Wow. Wait a minute. Okay. Thank you so much for blowing all my minds. All right. So again, it's one of those things where you just go, well, wait a minute. This is clearly a problem that has already been solved. And that's around photo logs and photo pages and all that. It turns out it's exactly the opposite of that. I've had so many people talk to me in kind of almost a therapy session of just how much pain it is. A couple of quick examples without mentioning any names. We have a project I worked on where we're right in the Great Basin, thousands and thousands of photographs, Excel spreadsheets broken down by teams, and literally months and months of the principal investigator trying to put all that back together again in terms of some form of spreadsheet that adheres to the BLM requirements, combined with the actual photos that have to be captioned in a particular way due to not just the BLM regulations, but also changing regulations for the IMAX forms.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we could just move over one state to the brand new regulations that are coming out for Nevada, for Utah after years. Another story where, hey, I don't really have a way of doing my photo pages, so I use a PowerPoint template.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, it's just epic pain. And so, Chris, when you came out to visit me in Italy, you must have been pent up the entire time. I don't know what you watched on the airplane, but you came out to, like, within 3 seconds, you're like, you need to solve photos. So caption is if I could say it in just like 60 seconds or less, is it obviously will generate your photo logs. It generates your photo pages. It does those things. So we can just stop there, breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most interesting thing we had to solve was, in order to write a caption, we actually had to solve kind of field archaeology, because to write a caption is, as I keep describing it, it's kind of like the game of Clue, where you have like Colonel Mustard in the kitchen with a knife.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what you're recording, where you're recording it, how you're recording it, why you're recording all the stuff in context. So we kind of built a mini Codifi CRM by virtue of doing this. And I'd say the kicker is that almost all the time when it comes to photography, you're using some form of external device. So if we're working on paper, then you have a camera, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter if a camera is a camera phone, which, by the way, has no like image, like name back in the day when we were using rolls of film,
Mm-hmm.
the frame or very rarely these days an SLR or digital SLR or mirrorless camera, whatever. The nightmare of dealing with all these different external devices is just insane. And so what we want to do, what Caption now does, and we're just days away from release at this point. By the time this podcast comes out, it will be released and available for you to try out and play with, is it handles external device management is the key. It uses this really cool QR codes that it generates in order to do all that stuff. We had to solve in-field synchronization without any form of internet or connectivity. So these are all major stumbling blocks to keep you people from just going, you know what, screw all this, we're just going to go back to paper, because we understand that, even though we're going to sit there and try to refactor someone's crazy pharmacist looking scrawl that they wrote in a Write in the Rain notebook, as Chris Sims can attest to. So the idea of Caption is to get us to write beautiful, well-informed captions of what's happening in the field, because we are, in many cases, the only or last witnesses to something before the Dakota pipeline comes through, or whatever else is going to happen in 2017. And we will not get all political, but let's just say that we are the witnesses that are out there, and it's not just a responsibility, but it's a great opportunity for us to be able to do that job. And so we want to make photography fun and useful and interesting and good, and that's what Caption seems to be doing for people. And the responses to it so far, honestly, I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah, I've actually cried a couple times because people are so excited by it. I mean, it's really crazy. I mean, yeah, we can produce PDF forms and we can do all this stuff and all that, and that's all critically important. We'll talk about that soon or next. But the idea that we have something that removes this much pain is really cool. So that's kind of what Caption's focused on.
Yeah, I feel like since I started talking to Michael about this a few years ago, and we really started hammering out in 2016 here, I feel like if I left Codifi right now and never contributed anything else, but I was at least part of the conversation in eliminating photo logs and photo pages and typing all that damn stuff up after you get back in from the office, then my life will be complete. I feel like just solving that problem, is amazing. And And that's really just the tip of the iceberg about with what we're doing with what we're going to call with what we're calling Codifi CRM, which Codifi Caption will be a module of. So, Michael, why don't we jump into Codifi CRM and some of the things that's going to be able to do? Of course, incorporating Caption and some of the other things we've actually developed over the summer already that will be modules of Codifi CRM.
This might also be a great opportunity to bring Chris Sims in, because one of the things that happened at GBAC, because it was my first opportunity to kind of meet him in person, was thinking about shovel tests, because I've done these kind of massive excavation projects and surveys, especially overseas, but shovel tests, wow, they just get short shrift, right? And yet it's like 70-80% of how archaeology is done in the country. And they're actually really interesting on a lot of different levels from my perspective, because they're little mini excavations. And also when you get into environmental stuff, then I've talked to since we met at GBAC, talked to soil scientists and other environmental folks who would use these things to build soil horizons and all this. But we don't do typically in archaeology, and all of you people know this is true because you're telling me, so I know there will be no hate email. Is like, we just don't do that because we don't have time to do it. We don't have budget, all those things. So the objective of STP is to think through all of the different activities that are involved. And I'm dying to get Chris Sims on the call, because he's been doing a lot of this stuff, especially out in Kentucky and in Southeast. What blew my mind was thinking through, okay, so you got a bunch of people walking transects and pacing out and dropping these shovel tests. And there's a bunch of bravado, men and women, everyone. I asked so many questions, people at SEAC. All right, so how many shovel tests you do? I did 197,000 of them on Tuesday, and you're out there, it's muddy, it's gross. You got alligators, eating you, and all the bugs and all this. So I'm never doing this ever, right? And then on top of that, you're writing on paper, and then some poor crew chief or project manager is supposed to make sense of all those things. So the level that we needed to hit was, can we beat paper in terms of time, efficiency, and quality? So Sims, thoughts?
Oh man. Well, in the back channel, I was chatting. I feel like if my biggest contribution to archaeology is eliminating chicken scratch on muddy sheets of paper for shovel test recording forms, then I can die happy. I've solved, the biggest bane of my existence.
Nice.
We joke a lot on all these podcasts about how awful shovel tests are. And that's not to hate on East Coast archaeology. Like, we all respect it. It's awesome. There's some really superb sites out there. But I think it's because it's miserable. It's absolutely miserable to shovel test. And so there's so many redundancies and just wasteful processes in the whole workflow tied up in the way we do that. And so, that's been kind of like job number one. And when Michael and I talked at the Great Basin Archaeology Conference, now a month or so ago, and this was like the breakthrough of a big project we wanted to work on, I was like, yes, absolutely, yes. Help me kill shovel test forms forever. So I'm stoked. And I think that really the shovel test forms themselves are so frustrating from a crew chief or project manager perspective, because they're not searchable. And you've got these things that, you write down a whole lot of information, but in a way that's not meaningful and not usable. And Codifi CRM is going to be able to make that information meaningful and usable. And it's not going to be a waste of time. And it's also not going to take up a huge box that you have to store somewhere. Sorry, there's that cough. And so that's really one of the other big problems in archaeology is what is the archival side of this? Like, what's going to happen to all those muddy sheets of paper with chicken scratch pencil markings on them? what's going to happen to the boxes and boxes and boxes of just that? Like, is that even a meaningful thing? Yeah, I mean, we have to store it. It's part of our obligation to the resources, but it's really, archaeologists of the future really have their work cut out for them if they ever want to look back through other archaeologists' notes to get anything meaningful out of it. So, not to toot our own horn too much on this, but this is a huge, huge contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not so much that we're tuning our own horn, because what we're doing is we just do a whole lot of listening. So let me kind of, in just a nutshell, because the other thing we've done almost every single time we talk about Codify, it always stays at this kind of ethereal level. And finally, we can talk about things in a very practical way. So this is in just a couple of seconds, I can describe to you how this actually works. So you have an iPad, you're in the field, it's in a life-proof case, it's waterproof, it's all the proof. And you're sitting there and you're already in a project, you're already out there in the field, and you're in your area, your project area, which is this place. And the crew chief or the PI, the project manager, has basically said, this is the area, we're in area A, everyone will walk your transects. So the very first thing is you can actually generate transects. And we are going to be using things like the Gotenna and Beartooth technologies to be able to provide a mesh network and synchronization right in the field, so that we can finally eliminate the whole craziness of, yes, I have a positive test pit and you got one, and we got to figure out, like, yell at each other while we're maticking through some crazy jungle thing, like, hey, who's got what and what's going on. So that is a key thing. But because we can add all these different elements to it, if one of the greatest, coolest things we heard and that we're actually going to be able to implement is just this. Imagine if we're all in the same strata, right? We're all in the same stratum. We have the soil profile, and someone on your crew is going to be really good at writing that stuff out. So the objective is, instead of having 10 people write crappy descriptions of the soil, we have someone who is doing that job and broadcasting that out to everybody else. And if we take that to the next level, the idea that we could actually go, this is what we're finding. We're finding this type of loam and this kind of these inclusions, and get people to actually start recording that, plus photography, plus 3D photography. Mm-hmm. Now we're talking about being able to record shovel tests as if they're mini excavations that have, and be able to provide accurate color in a variety of different lighting conditions. So we can actually feed that information back to the to Soil Web, and actually start to produce a better archaeology for everybody. That's the goal. So we're not inventing this. We're just we're responding, and we're trying to level this up. And so that field form that is the STP isn't even the real forms that we're talking about. And I think we're probably pressed for time today, but if we start talking about the information, the data packages that the agencies, here in the West, Utah, California, Nevada, in the South, Arizona, New Mexico, in the Southeast, et cetera, are requiring, we're looking at what they are actually wanting to have. It isn't the information on the paper. Mm-hmm. It's just the archaeology itself. So that's the big mission. The mission is to, a whole different conversation will be about our murder map of the entire country, of looking at what we need to actually record as archaeologists. And digital is actually making that possible. We've said this for 20 years. It is true. And now we're actually making it happen. And it's exciting, to finally be making a dent in this. And it does require, letting go of some stuff, like the safety of paper in the field as an affordance, but also an excuse for not going for it. So we're just going to try to get this done. And it's not just you guys. Pretty much everyone we talk to says the same thing. It's like, my God, if you did this, I could sleep, or I could die happy. Let's not die, but let's all sleep. I think sleep is great. I've been losing a lot of sleep since last Tuesday, so it'd be really great to figure out a way to get some sleep. Nice.
All right. Well, we're definitely putting together a Codify podcast where we're going to really dive in deep on a couple of these topics here, especially Codify CRM, because that's going to be our flagship software where we do all the things, and then some additional, I guess, power-ups, if you want to look at it that way, to Codifi CRM that we'll be able to do later on. But for now, I think we're going to talk about one last thing that we're debuting, what is in reality this week for us. But if you're listening to this, then it's already out and something we're already doing. And we're doing this through the Center for Digital Archaeology, Codifi, and PCS, Professional Certifications for Scientists. But we're doing training. There's a huge need for training across archaeology and other field sciences, and it's kind of this is not a slight on any of the organizations that are actually doing training right now. The webinars that they do, like the SAAs, SHAs, ACRA, all the different organizations, the RPA, they all sponsor stuff and they all put things out. And this is to not only focus on the things that are important to us, the things that we're good at, the digital applications, the different things that we can do, but it's also to, my thing has always been, I want everything in one spot. That's why on the Archaeology Podcast Network website, for example, we've got a page for links to other podcasts that aren't on the APN. But when somebody types in Archaeology Podcast, I want them to be able to find all the things right here, so they don't have to go hunting for it. Well, that's the same thing we're thinking about training is, we want people to go in a one-stop shop. They can come, they can find podcasts, they can find training, they can find their digital solutions to their projects, and they can find it all in one location. So Michael, why don't you talk a little bit about the training? We're going to provide the different formats and what our grand vision for this really is in the last 2 minutes of this podcast.
Well, I mean, this is a dream come true, and I'm just lucky that you're even letting me be the guy that talks about it. There is obviously a huge need for training, but in a very kind of ethereal way, and we're excited to see almost every single SAA webinar is totally sold out. We're going to focus on kind of a couple of ways of bringing training to people, especially at now where there's a whole lot of uncertainty in our field and our discipline that we love. One is we're going to provide, and when I say we, again, as Chris said, Center for Digital Archaeology, a nonprofit, PCS, a sponsored project, and a budding nonprofit that's specifically focused on training, and Codifi Inc., which is a B Corp that's going to help to sponsor this stuff. So basically, first off, we're going to offer what we're calling office hours, which is just totally free. Just please come with your ideas, and we're going to talk about stuff. So I know that by the time this comes out, it'll be December. So you might be hearing follow-ups about ACRA's webinar on the CRM industry in the age of Trump, or Chris is going to talk about drones. But you have topics, you have things you want to talk about. You come, we wrap, we'll figure these things out. Webinars that are formative with experts in the field on archaeology, photography, drones, compliance, whatever it might have, what have you, running a business, etc. And ultimately, then training series that we'll be doing, and ultimately after that, physical training that will be usually kind of coupled with different conferences that we all go to. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. The idea isn't new, but the training clearly is, and there's been an overwhelming response positively to it. So we're finally getting it done. So you're going to be hearing about it in every, APN, all the podcasts. This is for you all. I'll leave you with one thought. This is our personal pledge to you. If you're an archaeologist that actually wants to do archaeology and you are unemployed or underemployed, we are going to be providing scholarships to you. So this isn't just for those of you who are students. There will be scholarships for students too, but we want to be reaching out to everyone who wants to level up their skills. That is the complete mission of this thing. Mm-hmm. So watch this space, but we're really excited. So it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just mention two things as we close here. One, the APN is sponsored and partnered with Dan Bigman of Bigman Geophysical as well, who we've had on the Archaeotech podcast. And if you go to our website, you can see he's offering some GPR training, some ground penetrating radar training. And we're going to work with Dan and get some stuff over here on our side too. So we can, again, my mission of having everything in one spot. And I love that. So I would also say, we'll set up a section on our codify.com/ideas page, so you can tell us what kind of training you want. What are you lacking? What did you come out into the field and say, man, I really wish I'd known about this? If you can't get that info from my book, plug. No, I'm just kidding. Then we'll have it over at Codify Training. That was shameless. I should take it out. Anyway, I'm not going to. Amazon.com.
It's staying in.
That's right.
Even though it is paper, but that's okay.
You can get it on Kindle now, so that's pretty great. So anyway, so we're going to leave you with that. Go check out the links in the show notes. We've got centerfordigitalarchaeology.org/training, and we've got the Sierra Mark podcast we mentioned, the Codify Ideas page, and codify.com. So check all that out and look for the brand new Codify podcast coming your way. I'm going to go ahead and say by January, we will have this thing rolling. We'll start recording episodes in December, and we'll have this thing rolling out for the new year. So look for that. And thanks again, guys, for being on the Archaeotech podcast.
Thanks.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and edited by Chris Sims.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.